So I'm Alison Page. I'm a Dharawal and Yuin woman, and I'm a designer, and I've designed Seeing Sydney, Knowing Country.
Beat Knoblauch, that's my name, Swiss name. And I've been in Australia now for 50 years and settled in Sydney. And I find Sydney a lovely place to live. My collection comprises about 360 items, of which I think 50 items are being borrowed or exhibited this time in the museums of history. And I think it's quite an important collection of material belonging, referring to the first 100 years of Sydney.
I actually started designing when I was really little, and I was amazing at Lego. But I probably won't go into that too deeply. But I think design for me as an Aboriginal woman, I just thought about becoming a designer because I was very creative, but I was also quite technical and I was very good at mathematics. And so I sort of fell into design really. It's not a natural course for people with my kind of background to get into. I think a lot of rich kids kind of get into architecture and design. So I found myself at UTS as one of the only students that kind of worked part-time. But when I got into design, I realised it was about shaping places and shaping spaces and how much that speaks to my cultural identity and my cultural practice. I'm really driven by a compulsion to care for country and to express my cultural identity in the place where my ancestors have lived, Sydney, for thousands of years. For me, to give voice to my ancestors in the context of a modern metropolis is really hard work because it's buried beneath the layers of concrete and steel and buildings that we see that have come and just landed on top of country. For me to dig below those layers of the city and to amplify the voices of country and to amplify the memory of my ancestors is really what I do every day. And in a colonial context, it's really not that easy.
I'm sure there is plenty of room in Sydney for your input. And if you go back in history, there is so much culture in the Aboriginal thinking. There is plenty of room to express that in future here in Sydney. I look forward to that.
And I'm so happy to be invited in lots of different ways, whether it's through designing an exhibition or being part of large urban developments. It is a really wonderful point, I think, in Australia's history where there's a dialogue, I think, between the ancient storytelling from my people and Australia wanting to kind of shape itself in a contemporary context. I don't think we want cities that look like everywhere else, that have an architectural style from other places that have just landed here. I think in seeing Sydney and knowing country, you know, is almost, I think, what we're sort of going through this kind of metamorphosis in a way, the people who have lived in Sydney for a long time. We're starting to see it like we've never seen it before. But it's a way that Sydney has been for thousands of years.
I think it was 1980s, in the 1980s, when I saw the first, to me, the first lithographs, prints of early Sydney. And it interested me immediately because I just did not know they existed. And once you start to delve into it, there is a lot of material available.
And how does that make you feel when you realise what you're looking at? You go, oh, that's, you know, a view of Miller's Point. Like how, you know, is there something that just, like a little light that went off in your head and made you want to kind of see all the views of Sydney?
I guess the early prints, well, couldn't show much of the urban development. It was just landscapes. And when you compare what's happening today and how it was before, you see the difference, what happened in between. And these early prints, they are historical documents of which we must be proud to have them. If you go to a Swiss household in Switzerland, and same in Germany or so, you'll find in every house or every apartment, you'll find some prints of the city, how it was a few hundred years ago. Europeans are very familiar with prints, and they collect prints. So it was quite natural that when I saw the prints here in Australia, that I started to buy them too.
And did that give you an appreciation of the Sydney landscape and the Australian landscape? Like, how did that make you feel?
Well, I was astonished, because you have to imagine how it was when the first settlers arrived here. And there was a clash of civilizations coming upon each other, isn't it? And that's in a way very well documented in what we have.
And I think that Beat is what is so important about your collection to my people and to every architect, designer, property developer in Australia and in Sydney right now is trying to piece together, find the memory of country, find the memory of what this place was, to try and, I guess, return some of it to how it was. I mean, I think we all know Barangaroo was a beautiful headland at the time of colonisation, but over time the maritime industry reduced it to a concrete slab. So in 2009 it was just a concrete slab, and then developers come along and rebuild it. They replant the endemic landscape, they bring in massive engineering and rebuild it. And so back to your collection, you know, we can start to shape Sydney based on the memory of country, but of course we need those documents to tell us what there was there before, because it's been so augmented over time.
Yeah. No, I understand that, and there is plenty of evidence of that, fortunately, still existing. Yes.
But you know, for us, the evidence of these Sydney views are all in different places. There's one piece over there, and it's like a jigsaw puzzle that's been split up, whereas you've brought it together into one collection. We can see it there in the exhibition, Seeing Sydney, Knowing Country. We can kind of walk around that salon and look around and see Sydney, how it was at the time of colonisation, when this scattering of colonial buildings just started to come in and modern Sydney started to take shape.
Yeah. There is, as I mentioned before, there is plenty of room to come back to the Aboriginal culture and institute some of that in the cityscape. There is plenty of opportunity, because it went lost. Yeah.
For me, I look at the small groups of Aboriginal people camping in some of these scenes as a reminder that in the early part of the colony, these families and these clan groups were camping where their people had always camped, and they usually were in small family groups, and that they stayed there for quite a while, and actually some of them stayed for a really long time. But then most of our people were forced away from the harbour and forced out to reservations like La Perouse, where they still live today. But, you know, for us, you know, in 2025, there is a big movement of our people coming back to these parts of the harbour again. So these prints, I guess, are an important reminder of that those small family groups occupying different coves within Sydney. And also too, in those prints where there aren't any Aboriginal people, I mean, that's where we were also starting to be erased from history. For me, I would love audiences to see Sydney in a different way. To see Sydney in a way that it has been seen for a really long time by Aboriginal people, but to see Sydney as country. For those who live here, I want them to see Sydney as their homelands, as their Nura, and to care for it as much as my people do. And I think you could probably appreciate Beat, you know, even having the collection, all those years of finding those prints, it's so many, has made you feel closer to this place, yeah?
Definitely, yes.
And that's what I want for audiences. I want them to love Sydney like it is a family member.
What I like about the coming exhibition is that you look at it from a different historic viewpoint than people looked at it in the last 100 years. You dig a little bit deeper into history, and I appreciate for the research which is being done, and especially to see what Aboriginal culture really was in those days, which we not try to forget, but which we didn't know about. That's as simple as that. So I think that's a good sign for the exhibition.
I think what I love about the exhibition, just as a concept, is it's just like this conversation we're having now, Beat. It's a dialogue, I think, between you know, two different views of history, a shared history nonetheless, but it is two different perspectives. And I think that that is almost the blueprint for what modern Australia could be, right? Is these different values coming together, yeah?
Yeah, it's a very good argument. I agree with that. Photography did not exist in those days. So there was an era of discoveries worldwide, and people wanted to know how does Australia look like? What is it? What is there? And these pictures went home. That means to England or Ireland. It went home, and that's the idea they got. That's why they embellished everything. The gardens were beautifully manicured and so on.
Yeah, and you know, what I like about this exhibition too is that it does sort of tackle that. I guess it's sort of an uncomfortable subject matter of, you know, collecting, and, you know, or even the exotic idea of Sydney, you know, at a time when people in England were very curious and they wanted to know, and, you know, there was the Enlightenment period as well, so everyone wanted to know about the plants and the animals and, you know, the exotic other, I guess, and that is sort of a commodification of country in a weird sort of a way. There was a curiosity, sure, but that I guess, stood in stark contrast to the Aboriginal relationship to country, which was ultimately about sustainability and caring for it. So there were two different views of science and of nature at that time. You know, one was classifying nature and into taxonomic groups and dividing it up. And, you know, all this exhibition is about that sort of contrast between dividing up nature and keeping it in a holistic system. So, you know, the exhibition really does go to some of those uncomfortable places, which I think is, you know, it's a dark history, but we need to confront it.
Besides the historic value of those items, there is also artistic value to it, especially because trained artists came in the 1820s. Skinner Prout, Conrad Martins, Joseph Lycett, they were trained artists and their views are absolutely beautiful from an artistic viewpoint.
I think the title is a masterstroke because I think people do get very caught up in the visual sense. And I think, you know, even in the commodification of land and home and even decorating our home or buying land, our obsession with real estate, I think what this exhibition does is actually kind of just shift your perspective enough to say it's not just about what you're seeing. To actually know country, to smell it, to taste it, to feel it, to connect to it, to care for it, to love it, to worry about it. That to me is, I guess, the Aboriginal perspective of country and of land. To know that for your tiny little part on the planet, it's part of a deep time history of this place. Even Sydney Harbour, you know, it's only been there for 7,000 years, you know. It was a valley with a freshwater river flowing through it. And so for us to know that story and to understand how we all fit into that story, how we're part of that story, is what this exhibition is about. It's not just about chopping up land into little tiny squares and you know, renovating it.